Good morning, Bitcoiners. I hope you're doing well. The sun is super up. Bitcoin is running despite Greenpeace's best efforts, which we're going to talk about today. So, all that's left for us to do is talk about fun memes and other things that are new. Tastes like a meme war. Tastes like a meme war. Hold on a second here. Good morning, bud. Hope you're doing well. Good morning, bud. Good morning, P-Man Van. Good morning, P-Man Van. Hope you're doing well. P-Man Van, you warned me you'd be having trouble making the live shows, yet you haven't missed one. So that's awesome. I appreciate it. I really appreciate it, P-Man Van. Thank you for, I think, getting up early just to come and join us live. Good morning, Andy Benton, TGIF. You know, there's a video that I love seeing. I forget who does it, but it's on Twitter. I see it every Friday, and it's from the New York subway. I think pre-COVID, when things were happier. I mean, I'm sure you can get great music on the subway, but it's all those guys with the horns. Dun, 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 dun. It's so good. It pumps me up every time. I do, I was never a big commuter, not a huge fan of um, going into the office and all that kind of stuff. But I have fond memories, and I never moved around New York City during rush hour. I always went. I had children that were born when I lived in New York City, so I used to spend time with them in the mornings and then head into the city at around 10 in the morning. So I wouldn't from Brooklyn. I wouldn't be caught in the craziness, but I still love the energy. It was a neat feeling when the world was a happier place. I don't think it's as fun now. I'm sure people still have good commutes in the world, though, in New York in particular. Um, but I love that. It's my favorite Friday. He's been doing it for years. He's been putting up the same tweet every Friday, and I love it. I find myself dancing, you know? Good morning, Kevin. Good morning. Good morning, Daniel. Good morning. It is a great day. It is a great day. Much love indeed, Joe. Much love today. So, as you know, we like to, I thought I would. Yeah, there you go. That's P-Man talking about making the live show. So, normally, as you know, I start every show with the fakest news I can find, right? We want Moscow time to start our show, to have a little laugh. Hard to beat what happened last night. Hard to beat it. And so this is one of those rare occasions that the fake news from last night is actually the point of the show today. And we can't even believe it happened. So, as you know, Ripple has been funding Greenpeace for some time. And I guess they thought so. Even I remember going on to CNBC years ago on what's his name, Andrew Ross Sorkin Squawk Box show, and I went on because I was asked to comment on a study from the University of Texas. Whoa, academics! Academics were starting to spread Tether FUD, and this would have been in the summer of 2018. And so they were starting to comment on Tether FUD, and they had released an academic paper. And the paper went on to say, well, we can mind read the users that use Twitter or that use Tether because, and we know the markets are manipulated because we know what everyone who has Tether wants. And the entire basis of the argument was that the people who were trading Tether really just wanted more dollars. The whole thing was a big arbitration, a dollar arb scheme. And they wrote a whole paper on it. And the point was, literally the anchor of the logic of the paper was that, of course, markets and Tether are manipulated because we can see that they're looking for arbitrage opportunities for dollars. And therefore, we can see the inefficient spread between normie spot markets and the crypto Tether markets are not in line. And they did a bunch of hand waving. And the point was, ta-da! Twitter's a scam, or sorry, Tether's a scam, right? Wow, we got it. But I knew that Ripple was already funding the University of Texas for this kind of stuff. So when I went on the show, I said, well, first of all, they mind read everyone in the industry. The point of this article, the point of this research study from the University of Texas is that people want more dollars. And I said, if they would actually ask the question, are people trying to accumulate more Bitcoin? The whole argument falls apart. So that was my first response. The baseline here is off. They're measuring from the point of view of people wanting more dollars, not imagining that really what they're trying to do is find ways to pivot in and out of Bitcoin. Because this was before you could actually have shorts and longs at scale. You had BitMEX and you had others, but this was in the early days an easy way for people to short Bitcoin, where you'd go into a Tether or stablecoin for a second and then bounce back if you thought the price was going to go down, and you'd get more Bitcoin. So the whole logic of accumulating more Bitcoin was just not even treated. It was all about arb opportunities between dollar markets in the world, never understanding that people are just trying to accumulate more Bitcoin. They didn't understand that it was the denominator and didn't even think about it in the paper. So I went on CNBC and I said, look, they have this mind reading where they just know that everyone who actually loves Bitcoin really just wants more dollars, which is fake, not true. And second of all, this is being funded by a competitor, Ripple. And the people on the thing were like, no. But that was one of the first instances of institutionalized Tether FUD. And I don't know much about what's going on at Tether. I never have. But I don't see what anyone was ever talking about. So I was one of the first people to defend Tether in a wide open platform with lots of people around and people watching on television and people who didn't really know what was going on, who were already biased against Tether, saying, well, are you sure? And da, 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 da. So at that time, I knew there was something up, right? But Ripple, of course, hasn't stopped. That was their first plan of attack, was this Tether FUD. Oh, because I guess at the time they thought they would be the Tether or whatever is going on as far as rails to transfer things. You know, there was this whole idea that they were the original Swift operative system, that you could send money across borders and still stay in dollars, but have rails that are better and blah, 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 blah. We've all heard the Ripple rant. So now they funded Greenpeace for years, and they have this ridiculous handle on Twitter that they started up called Change the Code, where they've been criticizing Bitcoin and criticizing the energy usage and oh my God. So here's the best part. They commissioned an artist. And that artist released their work yesterday. And the whole point of the art that they have is to change the code so Bitcoin's more like Ethereum or Ripple. It's a proof of stake protocol. And they really go into saying Bitcoin is melting the icebergs, Bitcoin's role in global warming. They do all the punchlines you could ask for. But it turns out what they created, the art that this guy created, is this skull with computer components, and it's spewing greenhouse gases above, and it had laser eyes, but in the end it really looks cool. So the funniest thing is that Bitcoiners, in less than 24 hours, this came out yesterday, and by the time I woke up this morning, it had been roundly adopted as the new symbol of Bitcoin. It is being weaponized as we speak into more memes, into more ways of communicating Bitcoin. Giacomo Zucco has one of the best takes on it here. He says, Bitcoin inadvertently creates the Ripple shitcoin, 1. 2, Ripple commissions Greenpeace an anti-Bitcoin campaign. 3, Greenpeace commissions Ben an anti-Bitcoin sculpture. 4, Ben inadvertently creates the most beautiful and badass Bitcoin symbol ever, enthusiastically adopted. Poetic. So everywhere I go today, this guy is appearing in different memes and in different pictures. It's being shared widely. He's been given the laser eyes. He's been given the treatment. He's been given the blessing of Bitcoiners as being an important mimetic tool. And by pure coincidence, I'll read one more from Brandon, because there's been all kinds of takes. So before I get into the coincidence part, Brandon Quittem, who wrote the famous Bitcoin mushrooms piece, if you haven't read that on Bitcoin, here's his take. Greenpeace realizes their Change the Code Twitter campaign is backfired. Indeed, I don't even mention it or engage with it. I think anyone who actually gives it attention is a bit like a Craig Wright situation. Right? You don't want to give it too much attention. Craig Wright is better left in ridicule. you shouldn't even bother making him the punchline often, because it does give attention, and attention is persuasion, and which is what we're going to get into today. So in general, I've been happy to ignore change the code. I don't let it jack up my cortisol. I don't get angry when I read change the code. I do my best to ignore it and not get hypnotized by their arguments, because that's the point. It's to draw you in and then create a whole spectacle around the fight, and then it makes it real, right? That's the form of information laundering we've been talking about a lot on this show. So here's Brandon's entire tweet. Greenpeace realizes their Change the Code Twitter campaign is backfiring. So they partner with some hip artists to get their point across. Art is cool AF. When the artist learns Bitcoin is pro-environment and publicly denounces Greenpeace, the art travels to Bitcoin conferences. So we'll see. I mean, I don't know about the traveling to Bitcoin conferences yet, but we're going to try and get it for sure. I want it so badly now. We had the volcano last year at our news desk, and that was pretty cool. But if we had this son of a bitch, it would be way cooler. Right? I can't think of something this fun that I've seen in a long time. It was pleasant the minute I saw it, and the laser eyes are even better. So we love the laser eyes. That it's got the laser eyes. So that was a nice touch. Thank you so much. So just by chance, this was not intended, I don't think anyway, but one of our favorite writers, Derangement, wrote a piece yesterday in Citadel 21, all about the Bitcoin meme wars and how important Bitcoin and memes are. And he starts off the whole article with a meme itself. He says, someone whose star continues to rise once said, and then if you don't know who that is, it's Nick Carter, who became a meme when he went on a shitcoin podcast. And I'm a fan of Nick Carter, by the way. I am a fan of Nick Carter. So I don't want to pile on Nick Carter at all. But he's part of a meme now, so you have to admit it, right? He's part of a meme. And what happened to Nick, and if you guys don't know who Nick is, Nick, as a really young fella, worked for Abby Johnson and the whole Fidelity team, was one of the people that got them orange pilled at Fidelity. I knew him from way back when he wrote his master's or college thesis or whatever point at college he was in. He wrote it at a University of Edinburgh or Scotland or something like that. And it surfaced to me in about 2015 or 2016. I thought it was brilliant. I put Nick on stage for CoinDesk years ago, already realizing he was a great writer and a very lucid thinker. And so I've had enough time personally with Nick, and I've chatted with him. And he was a big help to me when I was developing a data tool for CoinDesk, because we use Coinmetrics data. So many times on the phone or in Zoom or in my office in New York City, and just chatting about the market and the place. And he actually showed me, because there was some, not everyone was sure. I didn't want to go down the market cap route when I created this data tool for CoinDesk. And what I created was a tool to measure all shitcoins by Bitcoin. I made Bitcoin the denominator in a crypto economics tool, almost like a compass, where you measured total trade pairs, trade volume, hash rate, and even transaction fees. Everything was divided relative to Bitcoin, because, of course, Bitcoin is the only true crypto economic network. So crypto economics, if you don't know what crypto economics are, they're economics like we all know. Crypto economics are just a subcategory of engineering, a real subcategory of engineering. They're not invented by shitcoiners and all that other stuff. So crypto economics is a real thing, comes from the incentive systems that you can put into growing a physical network. So it's a subcategory of engineering. The word economics are used exactly as you would use them in any other way. It's decisions about doing this or that and the incentives behind them. So crypto economics are really just the measurement of a decentralized system growing from the incentives inside of the system. So Bitcoin being proof that crypto economics works, I used it as a measuring stick for any other system that was trying to grow. And we plotted it on a radar graph, so a hexagon, a 5-pointed model. And actually, we could see in this model that, for example, at the time, and we published it in 2018, you could see at the time that, for example, Bitcoin Cash was a shitcoin, in the sense that it had very similar metrics to Bitcoin in social, and it had very similar metrics to Bitcoin in no, that was it, social. Everything else was weak. So because it had only social metrics that were close to Bitcoin and everything else, trade volume, network activity, on-chain usage, developer activity, everything else was much less. And just because that one was out of proportion, you could tell that it was a social manifestation. It was just vaporware. It was just social media. It was just people pumping the accounts. And that's because at the time, Roger Ver had the Bitcoin handle on Twitter, and he had all kinds of, and he was backing Bitcoin Cash. And a lot of that went directly into the marketing of it, and the marketing failed. It was a disaster, but they still had numbers in the early days. And people for a while were sharing those graphs that we created at CoinDesk to show what a social attack on Bitcoin looks like. Everything else relative to Bitcoin, small, except social media, which means it's a social attack. So at the time, we made this tool and thought it was cool. And some people were like, I don't know, especially Ethereum people were like, because it made Ethereum look stupid. And Nick Carter showed me that he had come to very similar conclusions as far as using radar graphs and measuring things for fidelity years ago. And he showed me the graphs, and they were very similar to the conclusions I had come to. So I loved using coin metrics, all of the long roundabout way of saying, I like Nick Carter. He became a meme, and Derangement started the article about memes using the Nick Carter meme without saying Nick Carter's name, which is powerful, right? So someone whose star continues to rise once said that Bitcoin isn't just memes. And Derangement starts the article by saying, I disagree. It's all memes, all the way down. Let me explain. So remember, we're talking about memes, and the best meme ever comes out yesterday. So we got a little wink from the simulation already. So Derangement goes on and explains, just first of all, a little bit about what memes are and how important they are and what they mean. If you don't know the history of memes, I was actually just talking with my wife about this the other day because she was explaining memes to my children, and she said it was funny pictures. And I said, it's not exactly that. And then she looked in, she goes, oh my God, I didn't know all of this stuff. So the term was coined by Richard Dawkins in his 1976 book, and as a nod to the word gene, right? The unit of biological information that is transmitted sexually from one organism to another. Dawkins realized that cultural information is similar in nature to biological information, spreading and mutating just the same, albeit on a higher level of abstraction. Just like with biological information, the ultimate test for cultural information is survival. And just like biological information, it has to be fit for the environment in order to propagate itself. So he goes on here to quote Alan Watts. If you're not into Alan Watts, go have a look at some of Alan Watts' stuff on YouTube. All kinds of beautiful art has been made around it. It's very mimetic. And Alan Watts was big into the psychologically expanding hallucinogenic drugs, right? Not an addiction or anything, just about how to expand consciousness and these kinds of things. A very interesting fellow, Alan Watts. No one's telling you to take drugs here. We're telling you to learn about Alan Watts. So here's the quote. In the science of ecology, one learns that a human being is not an organism in an environment, but is an organism environment. That is to say, a unified field of behavior. If you describe carefully the behavior of any organism, you cannot do so without at the same time describing the behavior of the environment. The organism is not the puppet of the environment, being pushed around by it, nor, on the other hand, is the environment the puppet of the organism, being pushed around by the organism. The relationship between them is, to use John Dewey's word, transactional, right? So this transactional relationship between individuals, collective individuals, and the entire environment that we're in. And it's transactional between them. They step and grow on each other is the image that comes to my mind. And so he says, what does that have to do with Bitcoin? Well, you'll have to ask yourself how Bitcoin network comes into existence. And once you do that, you'll realize that Bitcoin isn't too different from the memes and genes discussed above. Bitcoin is instantiated computer code, a digital organism that pays humanity to keep it alive, as Ralph Merkel so aptly put it. The cumulative work embedded in Bitcoin's time chain is what makes Bitcoin real and what makes it different from ordinary information and ordinary computer programs for that matter. Just like there's a difference between you and your printout of your DNA, there's a difference between the Bitcoin code, the memes that it implements, and the real world instantiation of Bitcoin. The Bitcoin network invalidates itself every 10 minutes, block by block, like clockwork, like we mention every morning, right? Like we mention every morning, we're still running. It is these blocks that are the unit of information that is transmitted. And yes, just like with memes, this information is cultural information. The fact that this information is transmitted electronically doesn't change it, right? It doesn't matter. It still embodies the core of the Bitcoin culture, the soul of the network. And just like memes, this information is transmitted and repeatedly, and is trying to and repeated action from one node to another, and before that, from one mine to another. In an ecological sense, we all transact with Bitcoin, and it transacts with us. If you've ever heard of Bitcoin and you were aware of the 21 million meme, Bitcoin transacted with you way before you made your first Bitcoin transaction. I was talking on a Spaces about Bitcoin 2023, May 18th to 20th, yesterday with the Bitcoin Magazine team, and we were talking about the situation in Holland, and one of the people said, well, you just got to make Bitcoin work, and the politics aren't exactly related. And we were talking about the Dutch farmers at the time and what's related to that. And indeed, I disagreed. I said everything in the end, the food, diet, all that stuff is related, because ultimately the struggle we're in, and he goes on to explain this, Derangement does, that essentially we are in a fiat. We have all this, what we talk about on the show all the time, the psychological engine sputtering along that is our economy, right? The psychological engine motivated by mimetic thoughts and mimetic behavior, divided along red and blue, environmental, not environmentalist, capitalists, communists. All of these different polarities are what some people describe as the tensions pulling our society apart. And what, if you boil it down, and so does Derangement here, we're dealing with this cultural split. And he says we are undoubtedly living through a culture war of sorts: left and right, red and blue, based versus woke, bluebird versus purple bird, furries versus normal people. It's hard to pinpoint the fault lines that are underlying reason are it's hard to pinpoint the fault lines that are underlying the underlying reason for this war. Some believe it boils down to individualism versus collectivism. Others see it as capitalism versus Marxism, self-regulating order versus central planning. Others speculate that this mess is related to a decline in religious belief, Nietzschean assassination of God. All of these reasons might be valid or partly valid, but for me, as a Bitcoiner, as someone who has marveled at the graphs of WTF happened in 1971, right? 1971, of course, the year America went full fiat, right? That was the end of any correlation to gold and redeemability for gold and all of the rest of it. All of these reasons might be valid, right? It's hard to point to anything other than the emergence of fiat money as the main underlying reason for the chaos we are living through. To me, it seems obvious that these crazy times are a result of the fiat monetary system and the economic as well as the mimetic consequences it brings with it. It is a system that is completely disconnected from reality, an artificial and highly political environment that, whether we realize it or not, is the economic operating system of our world. To me, the fault line of society is best summarized as Bitcoin versus fiat. I mean, that's everything about this show right here, right? That's why we get together every morning. The point of what we do here is about breaking up with a psychological engine, a mental model, a collection of memes that come from an old world, and embracing ones that come organically through this new system and this new psychological engine. That is everything about what gathers us here in the mornings, right? We come to contrast the fiat world with the world we're building in Bitcoin. We're coming to talk about how the actual fault lines are not red and blue. They're not, which is the reason why you hear me go out of my way to talk about LGBTQ plus and trans stuff and all of that, right? We don't want villains along these other lines because they're all abstractions. They're all incomplete ways of seeing the fault lines in our world, incomplete ways of assessing what's going on. And that's why we talk a lot about psychological operations. We talk a lot about how people get jacked on focusing on one thing and getting angry about some sideshow in order to not really focus on what the real fault lines of the war we're going through now, which is money, right? It's all about money. We all love money, and the money, the character of the money itself will manifest in the society that we create, which is why we create all of these infographics and charts and to try to show how this contrast actually plays out in real life, right? So here, Derangement, I mean, no surprise, has it right on, right? He's sort of nailed it here. And he says, he goes on to say, we are now 50 years into acting out the idea of fiat money. The meme that the nature of base money doesn't matter, the stubborn conviction that we owe it to ourselves. We seem to think that our collective future is a magical golden pot, seemingly without a bottom, that we can borrow over and over and over again. I believe that we are in the final stages of the great fiat experiment. Once more, the arrogant kings of this world decided to play God and meddle with forces that are greater than them, greater than us. Once more, we are finding out that printing money doesn't produce any actual value. Once more, society will transform or outright collapse, as it did in Egypt, Rome, and many other cultures before ours. And once again, nature will reassert itself by wreaking havoc and killing off everything that is not in accordance with it, be it ideas or otherwise. And he goes on to quote Genesis here, describing what happened in the early days of Egypt. And this is the quote. So when the money failed in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, give us bread, for why should we die in your presence? For the money has failed. Indeed. Fiat experiment, and what he contrasts here is that fiat in this case is not just localized to Egypt. It went global with the American empire. It went everywhere. Right, which is why we talk about global politics and war on this show a lot, and why we contrast the results of global mismanagement of money as being manifested by the corruption we see around us, the poor incentives that have led us to the war in Ukraine and Russia, with zero talk of peace coming from America, being interested more in maintaining US dollar hegemony around the world, and anything that would threaten that is just ignored and not talked about and pushed to the side, as we're going to keep talking about today. So he says here, printing money versus fixing money, right? And he talks a bit about the ethics of money production and that whole concept of Bitcoin fixes this as another powerful meme, right? And he does bring it up as thou shalt not steal as an important mimetic tool behind Bitcoin, and that has been forgotten in the fiat system, and that obviously we have thou shalt not steal as a powerful biblical mimetic message that almost everyone in the world agrees with, whether you're Christian or not, right? And he goes on to say the motivation behind the creation of Bitcoin is undoubtedly political, as Chancellor on the brink of second bailout for banks and various comments by Satoshi tell us. For example, while Satoshi agreed with the statement that you will not find a solution to political problems in cryptography, he also mentioned that we can win a major battle in the arms race and gain a new territory of freedom. Note the words used in his statement: a territory, environment of freedom, opposite of slavery. I would argue that win a major battle is an understatement. And I would also argue that the original assertion is wrong, but I'll come back anyway. I don't want to read too much of the article. You should read it. It's actually excellent. Obviously, he hasn't written anything poor that I've ever read. Then he goes on to say here that politics is downstream from culture and cryptography in general. Now, we've done a whole board on politics being downstream from culture and how that's one of the most important things and the reasons why Bitcoin is racking up all these successes, cultural successes, which will lead to a change in the political order. It continues to be why I focus on food and diet and the prioritization, in particular, of farmers, right? I think they're a valuable piece of this downstream argument. And the more Bitcoiners get close to energy, food production, the more downstream we're going to affect politics. You're already seeing it. You're already seeing many politicians rise up in this Dutch question around the farmers. It's sort of shaken up Dutch politics. You're seeing it come to America. American politicians, Tom Emer, no, who's the guy? Warren Davidson. I saw it yesterday. There was an American politician yesterday who said to Bill Gates, because Bill Gates was going on again, oh, we can't, the farts and the burps of the cows. He was tweeting yesterday, the farts and the burps, it's like 6% of global emissions. We have two choices, Bill Gates said. Either we stop them from farting and burping, or we produce fake meat. Those were his two options. And luckily you had, I can't remember, but it was a very pro-Bitcoin politician who came in and said, I'll only eat real beef and I'm going to cook it with a propane grill, you motherfucker, right? So pardon swearing if there's any children in the room, I should have warned you. But it was funny. So there you go. So he goes on, right? And that's why I think it's so important, right? This should be clear as day to anyone but the most blind observer of the Bitcoin space. The culture around Bitcoin is steeped in responsibility and self-ownership. Hold your own keys, not your keys, not your coins. Verification of reasoning from first principles. Don't trust, verify. Long-term thinking and saving for the future. Stay humble, stack sats. As well as a focus on hard work, integrity, truth, and visible outcomes. Proof of work. So it is no surprise that Bitcoin is spreading into the sound food, sound farming, free speech, and human rights communities. That Bitcoin is quickly and easily understood by people who are literally close to the ground, connected with the base reality of things. Is it any surprise that Bitcoin is used to understand readily by those who need it most? By those who are living in countries where the money is failing, by those who are rejected by the fiat system. Look at me as a Canadian. I've said it a million times. There was no bigger orange pillar than Justin Trudeau. It's not possible. I said it can't be done what he did to get that many Canadians to understand Bitcoin. And to this day, many Canadians, now there's you throw a rock and you're going to hit a dumb Canadian in Canada because they're everywhere. I mean, it's one of the stupidest countries in the world. It's filled with some of the stupidest people in the world. Unfortunately, they have been able to stand on the shoulders of Americans, not the smartest collectively. Some of the smartest people in the world generally pass through the United States or have some connection to America. America produces so many smart people, not questioning that at all. Very bullish on Americans, very bullish on Canadians as well. But both countries have produced, because of this fiat system, a fair collection of complete morons. And Canadians are a little dumber, just a little bit dumber, because they were standing on the shoulders of the stupid Americans and didn't even realize that, right? They didn't even realize that they had the bonus stupidity of standing on the shoulders of dumb Americans. So Canadians can tend to be some of the most out of touch and dumb people in the world that I've ever met, and not even close. As someone who's met a lot of them, I could tell you right now, we got some real moronic people. And it's not an IQ thing. It is this fiat derangement syndrome that we're going to talk about today, the Bitcoin derangement syndrome, Trump derangement syndrome. I mean, more Canadians have Trump derangement syndrome than Americans, as a proportion of the country. I would say it's an amazing affliction in Canada. Some of the smartest people I know are still so NPC that they still think January 6th was an insurrection. They still think it. It's like popular in Canada to believe that. It's hilarious, right? So, Dergigi goes on to talk about the black pill versus the orange pill, that Bitcoin is hope because the rules are stable. The Bitcoin system is reliable. It operates like clockwork. And it's an environment that is enforced without rulers and does form a foundation. This is not Dergigi's words. These are my words of where we're headed, which is I'm not the boss of you and you're not the boss of me. And that is the operating system of the future, which is why freedom practiced by individuals will be understood as a more powerful force to create freedom in the world than democracy. Democracy is the myth, the mythical engine of freedom, probably because it was used in previous times to get more freedom, in the sense that the American Revolution brought freedom, the American Civil War brought freedom. But things go a little wrong when you get to the world wars, in that it was political systems themselves which were fighting. And these political systems, in the end, merged in many ways. The American system took a lot of cues from the Nazi system, which it beat, right? The Nazi system was the coordination of mainstream media, the military-industrial complex, and political actors. So it was corporate, military, media, and the politicians brought those all together and definitely broadcast mimetic ideas and help plant the seeds for the world we find ourselves in today, which is one where most Americans believe that their freedom comes from democracy, that the people practicing democracy literally secrete freedom to them if they're lucky, right? But we're starting to find out that that's absurd. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately. Many of us thought that for a long time, but it wasn't. It's just not true. And it is, of course, Bitcoin that's helping teach people that, right? So here he gets into one of the most important factors, and I know Bitcoin Graffiti has mentioned it many times. We talk about it in our Jungian analysis, and I know Dergigi is a Jungian fan. Of course, his book 21 Rules for Bitcoin, based off 21 Rules for Life, and Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson being a major Jungian psychoanalyst practitioner. I don't know if he's pure Jungian, but that's how I learned a lot of Jungian stuff, weirdly, from this show in the 1990s called Northern Exposure. They had a fella on it called Chris in the Morning, who just used to read all these beautiful Jungian things. He was a radio host. And so I definitely got into it from there, but seeing it continue to be thought of, I've always thought that this fiat self and Bitcoin self and the Jungian analysis model is helpful, because in order to perform Jungian analysis, now the basic tenets of individuation from Jungian analysis comes from the idea that we have an ego and a shadow. And the shadow is always going to try and emerge. And you've got to process the shadow. You can't ignore it. You can't suppress it. You can't get away from it. And that the way to deal with it is encounter it. Encounter it. And then you merge with it and you have an assimilation and you regrow. You don't get to go home, right? You don't get to go back to where you were, but you're able to create a new home and a new footing and a new basis from which to continue your life. I would urge you to also listen to the song Salisbury Hill by Peter Gabriel. That has a lot of this Jungian analysis in it. How does it go again? He sees an eagle flew out of the night or something like that. And he has trouble adapting. He thinks once he sees this vision, that people would think he's crazy. This thing offers to take him home, and he's like, I don't know. And then he can't tell anyone. He's got to keep it a secret. But slowly, as the story goes, you'll find that it changes at the end, where he says, when this manifestation comes to take him home, he says, no, I don't need to go there anymore. I'm going somewhere else, right? I don't need to feel the way I used to feel. It's a song about getting over loss and getting over change. But really, it's about this. It's about oneself, finally, you being okay with a part of yourself being extinguished and growing a new side of yourself. So here, fiat self versus Bitcoin self, right? So he says, this is Dergigi again. Upon first contact, Bitcoin is dismissed by most. In a world ruled by the fiat standard, most people are unable to comprehend the orange coin when they initially stumble on it. I think it's safe to say that most Bitcoiners didn't get it immediately. I certainly didn't get it at first. Many a Bitcoiner's journey can be summed up as follows. What the fuck is this? Okay, sorry to swear again. What the fuck is that? What the fuck, all in. Right, so it's a pretty good example of it, and I think that's the case for most people. Right, you have a look at this thing, and then it ends up changing your life without you even realizing it. And it comes down to this point of encounter. It's why I said America has suppressed this shadow for so long. It's why I say America has this bubbling trouble, because we can't actually have an encounter with our shadow, because we can't count. We don't know, we can't follow the money. There's no way to understand how perverted our system is. There's no gauge. There is no measuring stick. There is no way to say we have fallen this far or we have grown this much. There's no way to say it, simply because the money itself doesn't allow us to encounter that aspect of ourselves. And Bitcoin, in the same way as America, is caught between these two poles. It is revolutionary force, imperial power. And I don't mean imperial as in run an army. Bitcoin doesn't give a shit about your feelings. It's not going to change because you have a bright idea and a better way of doing things. It is unrelenting in its consistency. And that's a form of imperialism in a sense, right? I don't mean to tie it exactly into what you've been brainwashed into thinking, or what brainwashing has gone into the word imperialism. It just means it's not going to change because you cried and created a statue and decided that was what should happen. So because of all these things, America is left trying to solve psychological problems that it's manifested by fixing the mind. It's the same old fiat solution. We need a pill. We need a politician. We need a charismatic person to come along, and that person will inspire us all. Right? Very World War II vision of the future, right? That there is. And I think a lot of people who are in the fiat world are basically waiting for a charismatic person like JFK to come along and make everything go away. Right? It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. The best we had was Trump, And it wasn't because he was getting shit done. It's because he was breaking this model. He was showing us that the thing was so divided and perverted that something like Trump derangement syndrome was possible, right? And now what we have here is Bitcoin derangement syndrome at a scale that is quickly approaching the Trumpian levels. It's quickly approaching the Trumpian levels. Now, if you don't know what Trump derangement syndrome is, just go look at any MSNBC news broadcast, any CNN broadcast. You know, the whole world is changing right now. We've got, and we're going to talk about that, Saudi Arabia and Iran and Syria and Russia and Ukraine and China and Africa and Latin America and South America. Everything is changing. Yet America is focused on Uganda and some bill they passed about sexuality and LGBTQ plus stuff, right? So that's all they want to talk about, right? They want to talk about Trump, 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 Trump. What is he going to get arrested? Is he not getting arrested because he was pretending to get arrested to get money, right? That's what Trump derangement syndrome looks like. And so many Americans are afflicted with Trump derangement syndrome. But like Balaji has explained many times, in the end, the fight isn't going to be between Trump and Republicans because Trump has already destroyed the Republican Party. It was the thing that people like me back in 2015 and 2016 when he was candidate Trump appreciated so much. Right? You'll never get early Trump supporters like me to 100% not like Trump. Whatever else happened, no pardoning of Assange, terrible. No pardoning of Ed Snowden, terrible. He's got definitely black marks on his record, but that he was able to crack apart the Republican Party to allow big change to come into politics, to start the process of changing reality, changing how we see and are programmed by the fiat world. That will always be fun to think back on for someone like myself. Watching him knock out Jeb Bush with one punch, right? Low energy Jeb, bang. I mean, one of the funniest things you'll ever hear in your life, right? And it just gone, finished, one punch out. And to watch that happen, to watch the Republican Party implode because of Trump and the results that it's brought, that will always have a special endearment for the people who lived through how hard it was to be a libertarian in the Bush, conservative, all that era, right? We only had one place we can go. The Democrats already hated us. So if we wanted to change things politically, we had to do it from inside of the Republican Party, and that wasn't always a good fit. It had a lot of problems. Now, Trump is no libertarian, but smashing it from the inside was a big benefit for people like me. Now, I was already onto Bitcoin. And even in a cosmic way, I remember being invited to, I was in New York City doing some Bitcoin stuff in 2016. I was invited to, because I knew some people. It was the night in May where Trump had more or less won the nomination. I think he had beat Ted Cruz in Texas or something like that. And there was a big party, at Trump Tower, everyone go and da-da-da-da. And I could go there or go to do some much smaller scale Bitcoin thing that night. And I had a path to choose that night. And I said, I'm doing the Bitcoin. Like, I'm not going to see it. I'm not going down that road again, right? I wish him the best. And I think he's going to win. And this was early 2016. But I'm not looking for solutions in that world. I'm going with the Bitcoin guys. And we're going to talk Bitcoin all night. And way more fun than talking about when is Trump going to be able to win, right? But nevertheless, this idea that it's now left and right and Republican, Democrat, the political system isn't where we're going to find solutions. In the end, and Balaji Srinivasan predicted this many years ago, the actual final fight is between Bitcoiners and the woke or whatever else it is. Woke, my definition of woke in this case is the no feedback loop propaganda machine that just wants power and just wants to propagate itself and will say anything and will accuse you of being a racist, a sexist, a misogynist, whatever else you want to put on the list in order to have some facsimile of a moral high ground in order to get its way. Right? That's how I see it. So, but and the good news is I think we're actually getting to this fight. I think we're actually now going to get to the fault lines of Bitcoin versus woke as the actual argument to end World War III, which continues to be why I think Bitcoin is D-Day in the World War III battle. if we are in a psychological and economic war, which is how I've defined World War III for several years now. I've said we're in World War III for several years now, and I've always said World War III might be a little hot. We might get some weapons. We hear about uranium being shipped to Ukraine from England, and who knows what's going on. And there's death. I won't deny, and I've always said we might get a hot war. But the real levers, the real battleground, the battlefront of World War III is psychological and economic. And so because of that, I've said for a long time that Bitcoin is the way to end World War III. And I think a lot of Bitcoiners agree with that. But Balaji now has shown in his recent predictions how that might come to pass really quickly. So Balaji here talking about this central bank digital currency, and of course, JP Conning, this fucking guy's been around for years. But you said that the actual truth is when I looked at the graphs, it was different from what you said, right? This guy has been just a pain in the ass, weak, still listening to the experts, still wondering when the central bank is going to release its prescriptions, right? So if you don't know who JP Conning is, I like the guy. I follow him. I like his pictures of old money. He collects old money, and that's about the end of how much he has to offer intellectually. So here he is criticizing Balaji about this, complaining that FedNow, right? FedNow, this new CBDC tool coming from the Federal Reserve this summer, isn't a CBDC, right? So he's sitting there crying and saying, Balaji, you're not being honest. It's not exactly that, right? You're always talking about the Indian settlement system. Why don't you have a problem with the Indian settlement system, but you do have a problem with the, you know what I got to do? I got to start putting my glasses on when I pretend I'm JP Conning. So he goes on to say it. So this is what Balaji writes back to him, right? He goes, central bank digital control equals CBDC. You don't need the currency. And he goes, FedNow is central bank digital control, even if it's not technically central bank digital currency. I strive to be precise. So let me make some important clarifications about FedNow in response to fair points. Now, I don't want to characterize JP Conning. I've been making fun of him. I don't want to characterize him as a disingenuous person. He is someone capable of learning, changing his mind, and he is not a bad actor necessarily. Just maybe a little limited in creativity. Maybe hasn't actually encountered his fiat self yet. Maybe hasn't gone through the rite of passage of burning an old side of him. Maybe just holding on a little bit to shreds of an old world. I don't know. I don't want to mind read him or psychoanalyze him too much. He is a gentle and fair person and is capable of learning. So I want to give him credit for that. And I enjoy his writing, and I, again, enjoy the pictures of money he shares, right? But anything he says about Bitcoin has been stupid and wrong for, I think he's been talking about it since 2012, maybe 2013. Nothing but a track record of wrong, and we can, let him know about this anytime you want, because that's really the story of JP Conning. I remember when he was working for the central bank and I was still working for the Senate Banking Committee, and we probably had very similar qualities of life at the time, right? You work for a government, you get some money, and you got a car, you got a place, you drive around, you see people, you live in there. That's not how I live anymore. You know what I mean? I checked out of that world. So here's what Balaji says. First, FedNow is highly centralizing. It's an instant payment system where every payment goes through Fed-controlled server and must comply with applicable controls. Comply with applicable controls is important. And the roadmap is to support not just P2P payments, but also consumer to government and government to consumer, which means automatic debiting from your account and automatic stimulus. In other words, even more direct government control over your bank account. The same Fed that sends interest rates to zero and then to the moon, the same Fed that killed 5 of its own banks and blamed their deaths on everything other than its own policies. In July, that Fed will soon have the ability and power to monkey with your bank account directly to freeze or drain funds at will with applicable controls and consumer to government systems. Rather than being able to impeded by the current antiquated banking tech stack, right? So he does say that the antiquated stack does create barriers to the kind of control he's worried about. But yes, FedNow isn't technically a central bank digital currency. There isn't a blockchain or equivalent where you can see the on-chain flow of every digital dollar. However, it is what people fear when they talk about CBDC. It's central bank digital control, even if it's not central bank digital currency. So that's just it. Don't get fooled by the tech, right? It's the control that people are afraid of. And fear, of course, is the most persuasive factor around, right? You've got fear, you've got prestige. These are the things that help persuade people, right? If it's prestigious or not, if it creates fear or not, these are much more powerful motivators than technically it is not built the same way as other CBDCs. The technology is not according to my definition, right? It's stupid. It's about fear. So I agree the distinction between FedNow, this is Balaji again, and a CBDC is important from a technical standpoint, but not from a civil liberty standpoint. I think of FedNow as a little bit like a virus that has evolved to evade recognition by changing its sequence without really changing its function. People are immunized against the term central bank digital currency, but not all forms of increased central bank digital control, and FedNow is certainly the latter. So he goes on to talk about the fundamental questions, and then JP goes on, but the Indian thing, or the Indian program, right? You said the Indian one is great. So this is what Balaji says about that. He goes, the longer answer is that we must be able to make distinctions between governments and not simply technologies. In a complete reversal of my mental model in 1990 or 2000 or even 2010, I trust the Indian government much more than I do the American federal government, though there are competent American state governments. Because India is a country on the rise and no longer the socialist basket case it was under Indira Gandhi's emergency. Conversely, America is unfortunately a country where the blue areas are in visible physical decline. It is no longer the stable capitalist country it was under Reagan and Clinton. This is obvious for all the Indian founders that just saw their deposits vanish at an American bank and had to wire their money home to the safety of Indian banks. Powell has turned America into Argentina, into a country where the central bank, banks, and bank regulators can cause and then cover up the collapse of a bank and then blame the depositors for the collapse. He's absolutely destroyed the international tech founders' faith in U.S. banks. Some on the left wanted, let me see, I turned pages here. Some on the left wanted, some on the left wanted the tech bros to get out, and some on the right wanted people to go back to their country of origin. Well, now they are. This is not a dunk. I'm as shocked and dismayed by the physical and social decline of the last decade, the decline of blue cities like San Francisco and LA and Seattle, the mindless rage online, and now the collapse of trustworthiness of US banks, as any clear-eyed American. I'm in some ways even more shocked by the rise of India because it's much easier to destroy than to build. But there are greater forces than any of us. Civilizations have heartbeats and life cycles. They rise and fall. India was once great, then laid low for generations, and is now rising again. I deal with the world as it is, not as I might wish it to be, and the world I see is a descending west and an ascending east. What's his name does... JP comes back and says, but they can't really... They didn't say anything about taking the money out of your account. He goes, who has the keys? And then JP had to be like, they have the keys. So what if they haven't advertised they're going to extinguish money from your account? Do you think they give you cryptographic keys in this system to use? Of course not, right? Of course not. So stupid, right? Now think about it, right? Think about it. What did Balaji just say there about America? Well, what do we see out in the news? What do we talk about every day? We've got this story now. This was covered on Tucker Carlson last night. Imagine, right? Trump derangement syndrome is so perverted that they've let Hunter Biden get away with no questioning about this. Listen to what I'm about to tell you. Hunter Biden used an FBI mole named One Eye to tip him off to China probes. Now, what ends up happening is this fella, right, that he has this mole named One Eye, this Israeli energy expert knows all the facts, and it's corroborated by the money that we now see has been put from these Chinese people into Hunter Biden's account that went to various family members and da-da-da. So this energy expert who worked in Washington, D.C., is from Israel, has worked with the Bidens in this case, knew that he had the FBI mole that was helping tip him off. They were getting paid. His name is Gal Luft, right? A former Israeli Defense Forces lieutenant colonel with deep intelligence ties in Washington and Beijing. Now, he's been arrested in Cyprus because he was about to spill the beans on all of this stuff, and he's been arrested on arms dealing charges. And he goes, I've never dealt arms in my life. It would be, his exact quote is something like, it would be funny if it wasn't so sad, or something like that, right? Now, that's not the way someone who's been lying would talk, right? Here's what he says. It would be funny if it weren't tragic. I've never been an arms dealer, right? So that's what he says. So we're dealing with, in America, a system where we have criminals in charge. We have actual criminals, like a criminal organization, a crime family is running our political systems. And yet people still try to cast the debate between left and right, and who's a good person and who's a bad person, and who's going to help people who are persecuted because of their sexuality, when in fact Trump was the only and original candidate to ever support LGBTQ plus issues. There's never been a candidate who did it until him. And by candidate, I mean Obama didn't do it as a candidate. He did it as president, right? Hillary Clinton wouldn't bring herself to do it. Trump was the first. There's pictures of Trump 2016 hugging the pride flag, right? And that is, of course, completely washed away and erased and doesn't matter. Now, again, I'm not here to explain that Trump is great and all of that stuff, right? That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the mimetic warfare around Trump derangement syndrome, allows for other things to happen, like Hunter Biden, and no one questioning it, right? No one questions it. The press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, was asked about it 2 days ago, and her answer was, "Oh, it's just lies, and I'm not even going to answer it. It's just been lies for years." Okay, I guess we're not going to hear about the laptop or anything like that. So, luckily, Bitcoiners, unlike Trump, have created a bunch of protections against the system and do understand the fault lines of World War III probably better than anyone in the world, because the mimetic force that we have, right? This one I put because I was just laughing about it when the White House report on Bitcoin came out the other day. And so, I was laughing out loud when someone responded to the White House with this. And it was too long, didn't read, don't care, not going to sell, right? And it was I'm still laughing at the thought of it, right? So luckily, we have all these memes that we transfer quickly, that we share quickly, that we're able to use as real defense mechanisms and as offensive mechanisms as well. And I think in the end, we're going to have the capacity to take on the woke monsters and the fiat monsters, because our mimetic powers are so much greater. They just gave us, I mean, this is pure fiat that created this beautiful monument to Bitcoin mimetic warfare. And it's like the Afghans who, when America was running away, and we were talking about the Taliban public relations department yesterday, thanking America for leaving all the weapons behind and showing the drip of the current Taliban soldier. If you look at the current Taliban soldier, it's all American gear. They look like the most well-equipped. They're not sheep herders anymore. They look like legit soldiers now. And that's because of the billions of dollars of equipment the Americans left there. So just like the American military leaving Afghanistan with the largest military bounty, I think, in the history of the world, we've been given this beautiful monument because they don't understand memes. They don't get them, right? That's one of the big advantages here. Not only do they not get the memes, they don't really understand where the psychological and economic warfare is going to play out. And here's a great example, right? Oliver Stone, right? Now, say what you will about Oliver Stone. Over the years, I've definitely disagreed with some of the stuff he said. I've not always been on his side. But Oliver Stone, if you're too young to know who he is, he made a bunch of movies in the 80s and 90s that everyone loved, Platoon and others, JFK. He's been regarded as one of the people not afraid to do stuff that's a little out of the ordinary and can be confused with a socialist from time to time. Maybe he is. I don't want to mind read him, but he's coming out with a movie now called Nuclear Now. and it is a pro-nuclear energy movie. And it's the first time we're going to see a talented storyteller jump into the nuclear energy game. And this is a field that will only benefit Bitcoiners. And this is part of the turning of the tide and changing of the mimetic situation, because we're, as Bitcoiners, are going to start absorbing all of these pro-nuclear people, because we can talk about this. We don't care about how Greta feels about it. We don't give a shit about Greta's feelings on nuclear, right? So we're going to be able to engage with this content. We're going to be able to propagate it. And if it's good, we're going to put the memes behind it and we're going to run with it, right? Not only that, Bukele, I don't know if you saw this, Bukele just becoming the absolute leader of the free world now. Now, remember, I talk about it a lot, the idea of Biden being the leader of the free world, using the typical title given to the American president, is as sad and hilarious as it is absurd, right? But you can actually throw that title on Bukele now and go, yeah, maybe, it kind of fits. Here's what Bukele's offering this week in political bills in his country. He says, next week, I'll be sending a bill to Congress to eliminate all taxes, income, property, capital gains, and import tariffs on technology innovations, such as software programming, coding, apps, and AI development, as well as computing and communications hardware manufacturing. Pretty sure that's going to be a good thing for El Salvador. I'm pretty sure that's going to put a whole bunch more wind in our sails as far as building tools that can help the mimetic warfare, help the economic warfare that we're engaged in, right? And finally, the other, let's do the peace thing for a second as well, right? This idea of America propagating peace in the world, right? You have an actual New York Times op-ed. The U.S. is not an indispensable peacemaker, talking about China's role in Iran and Saudi Arabia. A lot of people now picking up that times have changed and that the capacity for America to be the global policeman is now wildly out of sync with global perceptions, and no amount of mimetic warfare from America can bring this back, I don't think, unless Hollywood is entirely engaged in it, and I can't imagine that happening, and all of the other apparatus. Most people have been turned off by these persuasion avenues that have been typical of the Fiat era. So we're getting insulated by the memes, we're getting insulated by the failures of the Fiat system, and other things are growing, other things are blossoming. And I don't think the rest of the world is ready to just lay down and live with American failure as it's exported around the world as the money itself fails. I think everyone else in the world wants to get on with things. They don't want to be caught up in Trump derangement syndrome. They don't want to be caught up in all the other fights that go on in America. So in the end, I think that you're going to have the actual battle lines become clear. It's about a free money versus a not free money. And that's it. That's the fight of World War III. And we'll have things on our side and AI and there's other stuff coming and we'll see how it goes. But it looks like Balaji's prediction that World War III, the actual fight distills to Bitcoin versus the woke, is starting to play out in economics. It's starting to play out in politics. And I think you're going to see more and more people rushing to either camp. And so that's what I think. Those are my predictions for today. All right, let's see some of these quotes. We got a lot of quotes. We got a lot of comments today. Yeah, greatest skull ever. It is, huh? All right, I'll start there. You say it's the fakest news. You say it's but we're not at tomorrow yet. Yeah, there'll be more tomorrow. Yeah, there'll be more tomorrow. they one up themselves. Everyone hit the like button. We love the like button. We love the like button. Bud. Driving and enjoying the breakup. Life is good. Awesome, Lucky. I love driving and listening. They need to read software. Yeah, it's interesting stuff. Good morning, Dex. Where were you, Dex? Work early. Oh, wow. Greatest guy. It is indeed the greatest skull ever. Fighting for peace is like screwing for virginity. I like it. New skull hash rate. Go to exahash a second. Do you think Alan Watts would have been a big corner? Yeah, of course. I mean, I think I think there's one thing you're going to find in common with a lot of Bitcoiners. It's the level of awareness. The thrust of what's happening is just an awareness uptick amongst many people. Bitcoin helps you get there. It's the encounter thing, right? It helps you fix yourself in a lot of ways, I think. Cow farts. The worst. Proof work solves the problem of proof stake, which is just cantilever-driven oligarchy. Yep, that's it. Where do I? Bon matin à tous. Good morning, everyone. Buenos dias a todos. Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, Bitcoiners. I'm feeling sick. We will pray for you, Jose. We will pray for you. God bless you, my man. I hope you feel better. Yeah, it was a great show, Daniel. I'm glad you were a fan. If people, it's hard to find though, and you got to find it with the actual soundtrack. That's the problem. They released it on DVD, and they've never syndicated it on any of these apps. I don't understand. It's like the greatest show ever. If you don't know what it is, it's about a New York City trained doctor just out of school. No one would pay his tuition except the state of Alaska, so he's got to go to Alaska for 4 years the moment he graduates, and he hates it. He just hates it. But the town is the best. And so it's this tension between a New Yorker who just wants to be in New York City and the smallest, most hillbilly town you'll ever find, with a lot of eccentric people and a lot of amazing things. It was a magical show. You must integrate the shadow, indeed. Yeah, indeed. Same thing I thought. Yeah. Bitcoin is both an unstoppable force and an immovable object. That's it. Yeah, that's it. Dirty G's description of countering Bitcoin, like he's explained my Bitcoin journey to a T. Yeah, it's Dirty G, not Dirty G, but there must be a mistake. Dirty G. Yeah. Morning, Bitcoiners. Coming in hot this morning. Yeah, we're trying. When I told people at CBDC, they thought I was nuts. Yeah, it's a bummer. Canadians will be the first to be trapped in this thing, by the way. Dumb people, sorry. They always think you're nuts at first. It's not streaming anywhere. What's not? Yeah, it's not. It's not. It never. Something to do. What it was the guy, the Jungian guy that I'm mentioning, Chris in the Morning. He had this radio show, and he played so much music on the radio show that I think the rights of it are very complicated, because the soundtrack is amazing, and I don't know if you can just put that kind of soundtrack that way anymore. I don't know. Narwhal Tacos, great. I started watching your channel about a week ago, Nolan. Really enjoy the early morning mental calisthenics you inspire. Awesome, Narwhal. That's what we're trying to do here. The design of the show is, there's so much coming at you every day in the news. Avoid it, right? It's all scammy. Come here. This is coffee amongst friends in the morning. We go through all the stuff, and hopefully you're insulated for the rest of the day against all the psyops and the trouble. I love that show. Great. Yeah, it was the best. Freedom feels good. I've been taking money out of the bank. Yeah. Yeah. Did you know, Daniel, that they actually crossed over? They were filmed in the same town as Twin Peaks. And there was an episode of, there was one of the early episodes of Northern Exposure. The sound of the music of Twin Peaks is playing, and they're at the waterfalls from the actual Twin Peaks. So the cast were all friends, because it was filmed simultaneously in the same town. And there's a scene where they're under a waterfall and they get some binoculars, and I guess the doctor is looking through them. He goes, I think I see a lady holding a log. And there was a few references, because they were totally friends. There's actually some pictures out there I've seen, because I was a huge fan of both, obviously, and have watched them multiple times. So I've seen that, I just had a conversation about the show yesterday. There's simulations winking. The DVDs are not as good because of the soundtrack issue that I just mentioned. That's why I have watched them on DVD, hated it. I had to. I took them all from one of the Pirate Bay or whatever was going on 20 years ago. I have it somewhere. Fun fact: the happening is 1 year. Yeah, so That would make sense, because it's always a few months. It's never quite 4 years. It's like 4 years minus a few months. Do you know that I hit when in 2020? I threw a dart in like maybe before the pandemic, but I threw a dart probably in July of that year to have my event for CoinDesk at the time on the day of the halving, and I got it. I hit it. Yeah. I hit it. It was amazing. Yeah. Because I did this guesstimation. It's a little earlier, and you know. I do love hockey. We love hockey, Joe. Hockey's a great sport. You know, I love playing hockey. All right, team. I went a bit long today. Got some stuff to do. Hope you all have a great day. Let me put up a quote. I like having a nice Bitcoin quote when I leave. You know. All right, team. Peace. Have a great day. Talk to you tomorrow.